Hello friends, my name is Behroz and welcome to my channel where I share with you tips, tricks that I read, learn and apply in order to become my best version. Now in this video, I will talk and address one of the most commonly asked interview questions, which is what are your strengths and your weaknesses. Now for the first part, which is the strength, I've already created a separate video for which I will leave the link above where I talk about how you should go about answering that particular question. Also, I've talked about a couple of strengths that you can make use of, and I've also shared some structured responses on how you can answer that particular question with regards to your strengths. Similarly, I'm making this video to address the second part of the question, which is what are your weaknesses. So in this video, I will cover the following parts. One is, why is the interviewer interested in knowing your weaknesses? Second is, how do you go about answering this question? Thirdly, I will give you a list of few harmless weaknesses that you can make use of in your interview to answer this question. Fourth, I will share with you some examples of structured responses that you can use in order to answer this particular question, that is, what are your weaknesses? And fifth is a bonus tip that I leave towards the end of the video where I will address any follow-up questions that the interviewer may ask after you have given your answer. Now let's start with the first part. Why is the interviewer asking this question? Why is he interested in knowing your weaknesses? Because for you to ask this question, the first step is for you to understand what is that the interviewer is actually looking for when they ask you this question. They are essentially looking for three things. One is honesty. They want to know if you're honest enough to give a real weakness. Keep in mind, once you get hired, and you're working at the workplace on daily basis, your professional weakness will come and show in some form or the other. So being open about them in advance is the best option. Second is self-awareness. That is the ability to analyze and recognize the areas where you are not so good at or the areas where you need to improve or work on. And with that, the third is willingness to improve. Because everyone has weaknesses, even the recruiter themselves have a weakness. That's why they don't expect you to lie about it. What they do expect is that you're willing and trying to improve on it. Especially what is your process and system of learning and exceeding even in places where the odds are against you. And the fourth is, how do you manage around it? That is, in a situation where your weakness comes into play or becomes a limiting factor or a challenge. How do you manage around it? Now let's move to the second part, which is how to answer this question. Number one is to share your weakness. Second, soon after sharing your weakness, it is important to also explain and elaborate what do you mean by that weakness, because you don't want interviewer to assume anything different versus what you want to say, and hence it is very important that you explain them exactly where and how that weakness comes into play, what that weakness is about, versus them going and creating any assumption. So for instance, one weakness that could be called out is public speaking. However, you need to make sure and you need to clarify that what you mean by public speaking as a weakness. You don't mean a meeting of 5 to 10 people. You don't mean a presentation that you need to give to senior management. What you mean by public speaking as a weakness is when you have to speak to a crowd of hundreds of people. That is where your weakness lies, because you don't want the interviewer to assume that you won't be able to perform in a meeting, or you won't be able to present to management or present to your local office for that matter, or your team. Thirdly, a must do is highlight ways in which you are either turning your weakness into strength, you are managing around your weakness so it doesn't impact or impede your work, or third, you are improving on your weakness. Now the weakness can be of two sorts, the hard skill weakness or the soft skill weakness. Now the hard skill weakness would be something which is very difficult to deflect because it is something which is required by the job and it is not on your resume. Here you need to make sure that you show and share your desire to acquire that skill in near future. For instance, there are a lot of finance jobs which require CPA qualification, which I don't have. However, I'm working towards that qualification. So on my resume, I make sure that I put in that the CPA is under work. So for instance, if I ever have to talk about my hard skill weakness, I can always say that I don't have a CPA qualification. However, I'm working towards it. I've given part of my papers and I expect to complete my certification in next 12 to 18 months, let's say. Similarly, listing a soft skill should also be accompanied with a plan or an approach that you have in order to improve on it. An example could be public speaking. So for instance, speaking to a crowd of hundreds of people. For that, you can say that you're taking some improv classes or some speaking classes to improve on that skill. Now let's also state some of the obvious. No matter what, your answer for your weakness should never be, I don't have a weakness. Never say that as an answer. Everyone has some weakness, and hence They are looking for you to say something about it and explain it, and then let them understand how you're managing it, how you're improving on it. Denying it only shows that you are not self-aware, which, frankly speaking, is a red flag for the recruiters. They won't take it whether you had weakness or not. They would just take it as the fact that you are not self-aware. And instead, you should frame the weakness positively. Let us use a weakness that could be construed as a strength at times. One could be disguising your strength as a weakness, or something which can be strength in some areas, in some situations, and can be a weakness in other areas and other situations. Second is a weakness which is not so relevant to the job or role you're applying for, because in that case, it is not damaging for the role. However, for instance, if you're applying for a creative writing role and you go like, I'm not a good writer, that's a big issue, because that's a skill which is relevant to the job and it cannot be your weakness. Similarly, you cannot answer this question using universally relevant and important skills. Example, communication, accuracy, attention to detail, or teamwork. These are the kind of skills which are required by almost every job or profession in this world. Mentioning them as a weakness would just do more harm. Now, moving to the third part, let me share with you a list of weaknesses which are harmless weaknesses that you can make use of in your interview if you can relate to them in some form or the other. Just make sure they are not too off versus what you are as an individual or person. I find it hard to say no or push back. Now, this is something which is not usually harmful in a workplace and something that you can work on along with your manager. On the pushing back, how I'm learning to push back is I use a couple of tricks and tips in order to say no. For that, by the way, I've made a separate video on how to say no, and you can check out that video and pick few of the tips and tricks that I've laid down in that video as a way of you sharing how you're trying to improve on this particular challenge. Another good way of finding or talking about your weakness could be around personalities. Let's say introvert or being an extrovert. So if you are an introvert, you prefer thinking about problems in isolation and then coming up with solutions. And hence, when you're in a team setting, it is difficult for you to brainstorm and come up with ideas. While if you're an extrovert, you prefer and can only think of great ideas when you're around people. So if you're alone and given a task to sit alone and work on it, you will find it challenging to come up with great ideas. Again, this is not good or bad, because introvert can be good in certain situations and could not be good in other situations. Similarly, extroverts can be good in particular situations and may not be so effective in other situations. So again, these personality types are not harmful weaknesses and hence can be easily used to answer this question. Now, being an introvert is a weakness that I make use of often to answer this question. Given this is true about myself, that I am an introvert, because for instance, when given a problem, I prefer to think about the problem by sitting alone, structuring the problem and coming up with the solution, and then going back to the team and sharing my options and suggestions, as against brainstorming about a particular idea on the spot in front of a big group. So in this case, how do I work around being an introvert is I always tell my manager or the team that I can be part of the brainstorming session. However, after the brainstorming session is done, I would also like to get a chance to sit back and be given at least a couple of hours or a day to think about the problem and come back if there is anything additional that I want to talk or share as a suggestion. Another weakness that you can make use of is being impatient with results, which can also go to show that you are very result oriented. However, in certain situations, being very pushy for results may not be the best option, and hence it is your weakness. And how you manage around it is that whenever you assign a task to someone, you also make sure that you agree on the timing when it is to get delivered. In that way, you won't have to follow up with that particular person on a regular basis. Rather, you'll wait for the deadline to come and only follow then. Another one is multitasking. I cannot multitask. Now again, there are good things and there are bad things. Not being able to multitask means that you are able to focus on one task in a very aggressive way, which is a very good thing. But when you have a couple of tasks, you won't be able to manage well. And hence, as a solution, what you can say is that recently you've tried to be more organized in terms of managing your calendar and expectations with regards to when a particular project can be delivered. And also you have become good at setting priorities. So what is important and what is less important, what is urgent, what is less urgent. So that way you can organize your task where you work on them one by one, but in a priority which is important for your manager or for the company. Another weakness you can make use of is being self-critical, which is you can say that you're never happy with your performance and delivery. Again, this can be construed as a strength, which is that you're always looking to improve. What you can talk about in order to improve on this weakness is that you are doing a lot of meditation and journaling, which helps you to understand your current state of mind and also acknowledge and give yourself a pat at the back for the good things that you've achieved and done. Another weakness could be focusing too much into details. Again, this is a good thing that you are too much into details, but not every time, because then you can miss a particular deadline. So again, here you can also talk about the matrix of what is urgent, what is important. So if there is something which is very important, there you can go into the details. But if something which is less important, you don't need to go into the details as much. Similarly, if something that is urgent and needs to be delivered on time, you need to recalibrate as to how much into details you can go, because it has a certain deadline you need to close that particular task in. But if there is a task which is not that urgent, maybe you can take all your time to go into the details and understand better. Now, if it is a hard skill that you want to call out as a weakness just because it is required by the job and it is not on your resume, in that case, you need to sell on your passion and your ability to learn fast, which is to convince the interviewer that while you don't possess that skill, however, in past you have shown examples and in your experience, you have taken up tasks where you didn't have the particular skill, but you made sure that you learned fast and you're a fast learner. So once you get hired, you will be able to pick up on that assignment very quickly, and you have all the passion. You can spend the days and the nights and the weekends to learn that particular job and hence ace it. Because if I'm the interviewer, I know that if I hire someone, I can teach them almost anything. But what I can't teach them, or it is very difficult to teach, is how to be passionate and having the right attitude. So for instance, I can teach you accounting or financial analysis, but what is hard for me to teach is how to be passionate, or how to be hungry, or how to have that attitude of learning and learning deep and learning fast. Now for the fourth and the fifth part, which is structured examples to answer this question, and the bonus tip on what kind of follow-up questions you can get and how to answer them, I will create a separate video and will leave the link to that video in the description box. Thank you for watching this video. Hopefully this video will now help you ace the answer to the question, which is what are your weaknesses. Thank you.